Crochet Friends, welcome back to the Stitch Sessions. If you're new here, it's Karen here, and I love all things to do with crafting with crochet. And in today's tutorial, I think you've guessed it, we're gonna work on these really adorable puff stitch mittens using the Gusset method. And that's a way that you can kind of shape your mittens so that it really kind of accommodates the thumb nice and comfortably. There's many different ways that you can crochet mittens, but I do refer to this method every now and again when I want a nice, classy, cozy look. Now, a little something before we get into the tutorial. There was a lot of trial and error when I was working on this because I've never done a mitten using the puff stitch before. And in fact, this is what I call the mini puff stitch because I only kind of loop over twice as opposed to the full 5 times. So those of you that know the puff stitch, you know what I'm talking about. If you're curious about the stitch itself, I do have a tutorial just on the puff stitch, and I'll leave it linked down below if you want to check that out afterwards. So I did kind of a whole method like I usually would do when I've done these types of mittens. However, with the puff stitch, it's a cushier stitch, which is why I thought it would be perfect for a mitten project. But it does kind of give you more give in the mitten. So I'm not sure if you can see this on camera, but this mitten, see how I'm flopping around in it? And this one I am not. So this came out quite large, even though it's kind of, you know, the pattern is typically how I would normally do it. So I went and I redid it using just slightly different stitch count to accommodate for the fact that this puff stitch does create a little bit more width in the mitten. So I was really happy with the result of this. It's got a nice long cuff. I really like long cuffs because then they'll sit nicely inside my coat sleeve and it really prevents wind and air from getting in. However, the really cool thing about this design is if you like the look of having a folded cuff like this, you've still got plenty of room to do that, and it still gives you a lot of depth there. So there's that option too. So we use the slip stitch method for the cuff, and then the whole hand and thumb is done using the puff stitches, and then we create a little bit of a shaping, which we call the gusset, in order to accommodate the thumb, and then we work the thumb in at the end. So once you kind of get the method, then you can go ahead and do your second mitten, and all is well with the world. Now, in general, anytime you make 2 of anything, more often than not, they're not going to be perfectly exactly the same size. Those of you that have ever done a lot of booty projects, you'll know that that is just a thing. It is very natural and very normal, so don't panic if one still comes out slightly larger than the other. These are vastly different just because of the fact that I had to adjust the pattern. So ignore this size difference. There may be a slight difference, but it's not going to be anything too crazy. Usually by the time we're working the second item, our gauge tends to either loosen or tighten, so it's natural that that will happen, so don't panic. As long as they can fit both comfortably on the hands that you're making them for, then you are good to go. But I love this colorway too. It was a variegated yarn, and it just gave this kind of Nordic ski bunny type of vibe. So I quite liked it, especially with the puff stitches. I really like the texture that the puff stitches gives it. It's just really just beautiful, elegant, cozy. And of course, if you want, for those of you that sew, you can create a liner for this. But I think with the puff stitches, you're not going to need a liner. I think it's going to be nice and cozy as is. So what do you guys say? Are you ready to get started? These are my lopsided mittens, but are you ready to get started on your cozy, cushy puff stitch mittens? Let's get to it. For this project, I'm going to be using the Caron Cakes Cinnamon Swirl Cakes. And it is a medium 4-weight yarn, and it comes in a cake of 227 grams, which contains 407 yards or 372 meters. You will not need the whole thing for this pair of mittens, but if you're gonna make several pairs, or maybe you wanna make a matching scarf or something like that, you might be able to squeeze that out of one cake. I always buy 2 cakes just in case, But for this project, 1 cake should be enough for the mittens. And for the hook, I'm going to be using a 5.5 millimeter hook, which is also known as an I or a size 9. Now, it does recommend I use a size 5 millimeter hook, but I always like to kind of play around with my hook sizes, so I'm going to use a 5.5. In case you use the same yarn, you might notice that it says that. And as always, make sure that you have a pair of scissors and, of course, a yarn needle to weave in your ends at the end. And you might also want to have the sizing chart on hand for you. So I just downloaded the adult garment sizing chart because I'm making these mittens for an adult. And the main measurement you want to focus on is the wrist measurement here. Now, if you're making this for a child, then I would download the child's garment sizing chart. And these are absolutely free on the Crochet Crafty website. And I'll leave a link to them in the description box down below. So once you have all of your materials gathered, then we're ready to get started. Okay, so I just changed my background here because most of the color of this yarn is quite light, and I want to make sure that you guys can see what I'm doing. So we're going to begin this project by creating the cuff first around the wrist, and then we're going to work our way up. So once we get to the thumb, we're going to start creating our little gusset here, and then we'll continue on from there. So we're going to start by placing a slip knot on our hook here. And I'm going to chain up 13. I like a nice, thick cuff. You may want to chain less, you may want to chain more, but I find on average between, 10 and 13 is a good number. So, and obviously if you're making this for a child, then I would probably reduce that size unless you still want a nice large cuff that you can fold over. Totally up to you. If you're doing it for a child, I might just chain 8, something like that, but I'm going to chain 13. Okay, once you have your 13 chains, you'll have something that looks like that. And I also kind of tested against my wrist there, and it's a nice deep cuff. Now, of course, it will probably shrink a little bit as I work subsequent rows, but I'm pretty happy with that length. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the second chain from the hook. So remember, you never count the loop that's on the hook. So I'm going to go 1 and 2, and into that second chain, I'm just going to slip stitch. Okay, and that is what I'm going to do into every single chain all the way to the end of my row. And you really want to pay attention not to stitch too tightly, because we're going to be using slip stitches for the entirety of the cuff. And if you are naturally a tight crocheter, I would probably recommend in this instance going up a hook size just for the cuff, because if you chain or if you stitch too tightly, when you come back around to stitch back into these slip stitches, it's just going to be too difficult to work into. So you can see that it's quite a shallow stitch. And so that's all I'm going to do. I'm just trying to keep it nice and relaxed. And you're doing this until the very end of your row. I've got a couple more here. Nice and relaxed. And I've got one more. Just like that. Okay, so this is what it looks like. And now I'm going to have 12 stitches. And from here on out, I should always continue to have 12 stitches in each row. So you're going to continue to repeat this. So at the end of every row, what you're going to do is you're going to chain 1, you will turn your work, and now we're going to continue to slip stitch, and you're always going to work into the back loops. So that means you're going to insert your hook. And sorry guys, my lighting is kind of funny today. So I hope you can see this. So I'm going to insert my hook in through the center. See these V's here? I'm going to go in through the center, pick up that loop, and I'm going to slip stitch. Just like that. Again, very relaxed so that I can come back and work into it later. So then I go into the next stitch, which is right there, and I slip stitch. And that is basically it. You're going to continue doing this all the way to the end of the row. And again, once you get to the end of the row, you're going to chain 1 and turn, and then continue to repeat. Okay, so this part of the project is probably what will take the longest because it is such a shallow stitch. And once you work up a few more rows, you'll start to see the full effect. It does create a nice stretchy piece of fabric. And so you're going to continue doing this for rows and rows until you get to the circumference of your wrist. Now, in this case, I'm making it for myself, so I can just measure it against my own wrist. If you're making this for someone else, that's where this measurement comes into play here. So if you're making it for someone who's maybe on the smaller side, let's pick the small here. So you're going to go to the wrist and you want to do a length that's going to be approximately 5 to 6 inches or 13 to 15 centimeters. You could always go on the smaller side because you do want it to sit snug on the wrist and it will stretch. So if you're making it for size small, you're going to continue working rows and rows until you get a length that is going to wrap around the wrist for about 5 inches for that one. So I'm probably somewhere in the medium range. So I'm probably 6 1/4 to 7 inches. I'm probably even going to stick to something like a 5 1/2 to 6 inches because like I said, I like the cuff to sit a little bit snug and the fabric will stretch. So I'm going to continue on with my rows, and you're probably going to press pause right now. Maybe put on a good Netflix show or something, and you're going to continue placing one slip stitch into the back loops only until you get to the end of the row. You'll chain one and turn and repeat until you get your desired length. Okay, so I have completed my cuff, and as you can see, the color is beginning to change here. And I have done a total of 52 rows, okay? So if I put that around my wrist, it actually fits pretty comfortably. Like I don't even have to stretch it much. And remember, we use slip stitches into the back loops only. Sometimes I will make a cuff using single crochets into the back loops only. So the look will be a little bit sparser. And generally I will do about 26 rows of single crochet stitches. So you can see here with the slip stitches, I ended up doing 52 rows because generally a single crochet is double the height of a slip stitch. So that's kind of the general rule that we use. So I am now ready to close up my cuff and begin on the heel part of my hand. So what we're going to do here is we're going to slip stitch our way to join these two sides. Okay, so I'm going to bring these two sides together, but first I'm going to chain one, and then I'm going to go into that first stitch there, and I'm going to pick up the back loop only as I've been doing before. Just got to help that along. That first one is usually a little tighter, as you can see. Just like that. And now this time what I want to do is I want to match up with the corresponding stitch here. So this is the starting chain, as you can see. So I just want to pick up that first stitch, and I'm going to pick up 2 loops here if I can. There we go. And then I'm just going to pull through all of these and slip stitch. And now our cuff is being formed. And then I will continue doing this all the way up. So I'm going to go into the next stitch here, which is right here, into the back loop, and then I'm going to pick up the very next chain. Sometimes I got to turn my work over here so I can see where it is. And I'm going to pick it up right there and then slip stitch through all of them. And that is what I'm going to do all the way up until I finish seaming up my cuff. Okay, so I have seamed up my cuff, and as you can see, it blends in just beautifully. So my cuff is ready to go, and you know, if you want to, you can try it on. I really like that it is snug but not tight, and yet it still has a lot of stretch to it. So I'm pretty happy with that. And now we're going to move on to working up through the heel of the hand until we're ready to create that little gusset there. So what I like to do always for the first round, so now we're working in rounds, is I like to create an establishing round. And this is a perfect opportunity to work over that tail there. So I'm going to use single crochets just for this first round. And so I'm going to chain one. And then what I'm going to do is you can see how the slip stitches, because we worked into the back loops, you've got these prominent kind of knit-like rows, and then you've got these little dips here. So what I'm going to do is I'm always going to work into the dip. That's what I like to call it. So I'm going to insert my hook here, and sometimes I like to go down a little bit just to pick up a few more loops, and I'm going to single crochet. And I'm just going to work over that tail as well. Okay, single crochet. Then I'm going to go over to the next dip area here, and that looks good. I'm going to insert my hook here and single crochet. So then I'm going to move into the next dip. So essentially what you're doing is you're working the end of every second row from your cuff. So I'm going to go in there. And so we had 52 rows of the slip stitches, but in the end, we're going to end up with 26 stitches all the way around because we are essentially going into every second row. So I'm going to go into this next area here. See, I don't want to go in there. There's only one loop. I like to go just a little bit further down, and that just gives me a little bit more support for that stitch. And then I go into the next dip row there and continue on. Okay, so I just find it just blends in a little bit nicer. So that's what I'm going to do all the way around. And then when you're finished that round, I'm going to meet back up with you. Okay, so I have completed round number 1. As you can see, it looks nice and uniform. And I have 26 stitches. So now what we're going to do is we're going to dive into the stitch we're going to be using for this mitten, which is the puff stitch. And I actually call this the mini puff stitch because I'm not going to loop over as many times as the regular puff stitch does. So we're going to yarn over, we're going to insert our hook into the very first stitch, and we're going to pull up a loop, and we're just going to stretch it up a wee bit. So you have 3 loops on your hook right now. And then I like to use my index finger to just kind of hold it there to secure it. Then I'm going to yarn over again. That's going to give me 4 loops on my hook. I'm going to insert back into the same spot and pull up another loop. So in total, you're going to have currently 5 loops on your hook. You're then going to yarn over and pull through all 5, okay? And that is the mini puff stitch. Now I do have a tutorial on the puff stitch itself, and there's a couple of different variations. I think the main puff stitch you would insert and loop 5 times. So how I went in, loop, yarn over, in, loop 5 times. Sometimes I'll do 3 because the 5 is very cushy and bulky, which can be really cute for something cozy. In this case, I'm only doing it 2 times. So I'm going to do it again. We're going to go into the next stitch. You yarn over first, insert your hook, and you pull up a loop. And notice I stretch it up a little bit. And then I yarn over again. I'll insert back into the same stitch and pull up another loop. So the goal is to have 5 loops on your hook. You'll yarn over and pull through all 5. And that gives you the mini version of the puff stitch. Okay, I'm going to do that one more time. I'm going to yarn over. I'm going to go into the next stitch here. I'm going to insert, pull up a loop. Then I'm going to yarn over, insert back into the same stitch, pull up a loop. I have 5 loops. I yarn over and pull through all 5. And just make sure not to split your yarn here. Oops. Let me do that again. So insert, pull up, insert, pull up, and through all 5. Okay, so you've got stitches that look like that, and they will sit a little puffy, which is exactly what I want for this design. And what you're going to do is you're going to do that into every single stitch all the way around. And when you get back to the end, you will slip stitch to join. And I'm just going to quickly do this for row number 1 and I'll meet up with you. Actually, this is round number 2, sorry. And then I'll meet up with you at the end just to kind of take you through how to begin subsequent rounds, especially for those of you that are a little bit newer. If you are experienced, then you can just go ahead and work up, whoops, several more rounds until we reach the knuckle there of your thumb. Okay, so this is future me interjecting here because this is where I realized that I should decrease my stitch count down to 22 stitches, and that's going to give you a much more snug fit if you are doing it for the young adult to adult size. So the next clip is just going to be me showing you how to decrease. And you'll notice it looks like I've gone further ahead in the mitten. It's because this was recorded when I did the first version of the mitten, so you'll see I'm further along, but that's why I'm inserting this voiceover here so that you know that you should be doing it in round number 2. So you want to start off by decreasing your stitch count down by 4 right in the second round or in the very first round of your puff stitches here. So we currently have 26 stitches, so we are going to decrease in basically 4 corners, I call it. And so that's going to bring your stitch count to 22 stitches. And that's what's going to really create a nice, comfortable and snug feel. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a spot in 4 corners to decrease. So right here, it's folded. So this end and this end is pretty easy. I'm going to decrease there and then probably here and here. Now, if you have an even stitch count, like I have 26, but it doesn't divide evenly by 4. So 26 divided by 2 is 13, and then 13 divided by 2 is 6.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to round off here. I'm going to decrease in every 6 or 7 stitches. So I'm going to start off here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain 1 as usual. And I'm actually going to start off with a decrease. So I'm going to insert my hook here, pull up a loop, and then I'm going to go into the next stitch and I'm going to insert there to create my little mini puff. And so that's my first decrease. And then I'm just going to count maybe 7 stitches for my next decrease. So I have 1 puff stitch. I have 2. That's 4. This 5. Here is 6. And now this is my 7th stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the 7th and 8th stitch together. So I'll insert into the 7th and then I'll insert into the 8th and bring those 2 together just like that. Okay. So yeah. Okay, voiceover Karen here again. I would, just to keep it easy, I would decrease into every 6th stitch, and that way you just have a nice even stitch count. So 6 times 4 is 24. That just means you'll have an extra 2 stitches, but it's not a big deal. I feel like that is going to give your decreases a much more even layout. So decrease into every 6th, or bring the every 6th and 7th stitch together. Insert my hook, and then I'm going to slip stitch to join. And that is how I'm going to end off each round. See how cute that looks? So because it's a chunkier stitch, you can see that it's a little bit kind of flaring out a touch, and that's exactly what we want, okay? So now what you're going to do is you're going to continue to repeat this round, so this is round number 2, for several more rounds until you reach the knuckle of your thumb. And then at that point, we're going to talk about the gusset. So if I fit this in here, right? So this is my cuff, and so I'm going to keep doing more rounds until I reach right about there. Now on average, it takes anywhere between 4 rounds to 6 rounds to reach that area. So if you don't have the person's hand to measure, generally it's 4 to 6 rounds. I usually kind of think it's going to be around 5, somewhere in between. It depends on if the person has quite a long hand, like the center part. I don't know what you would call that. But I have a funny feeling that 4 rounds is going to be okay for me, but I will check back with you guys in just a little bit. Okay, so I did a total of 4 rounds, and actually I'm interjecting here with the second cuff. You can see the colors are different because I had to go back and refilm the first mitten because I did too many rounds. So 4 rounds is actually perfect for me, which is what I suspected. In the original footage, I did 5 rounds and then the mitt just became way too large. So I would recommend 4 rounds if you're doing the adult size will be plenty. Okay, so now I'm at the knuckle of my thumb, and now we're gonna begin the gusset. So what you're gonna see next is footage of the original gusset that I did, which is the exact same technique. So we're gonna do 3 rows, and it's gonna include the gusset to create a little bit of a shaping for your thumb. Now, what you wanna determine at this point is, are you gonna make this for your left hand or your right hand? So right now, I'm gonna work on my left hand. So my seam is here. So I actually want it to be more on the center, on the inside of my wrist. So once you determine that, you want to place your work down flat, okay, just like that. And so all you wanna do is kind of find where the 2 center points are. So all I want to do is make sure that my side little corners here are nice and neat and that it's relatively in the center. It is going to shift slightly, and you'll see why in just a moment. So what I want to do is, because I'm going to create my left hand first, I'm going to create the gusset on this side. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to find the stitch that is sitting right on the fold there. And for me, it's going to be this one. And then I'm going to show you how we're going to create our gusset. Now, if you were doing this for the right hand, you would do the same thing. So if I was doing it for this side, and in my case, I just wanted to put the seam in the center. You don't have to, by the way. Like, you could put the seam on the side and you can work from there. It's totally up to you. By the way, if you guys happen to hear some hammering in the background, there's someone downstairs doing renovations, and I just couldn't find a better time to film this video. So if you do hear that banging, I do apologize. So in the case of us doing the right hand, we would do the same thing, place your seam where you want it, and then we would put the marker on the right side. So this method that I'm going to show you to create the gusset is going to be the same for both. It's just that when it's on the left side, you're going to get there sooner. So if I count the number of stitches I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So that happens to fall into the 6th stitch. If I was doing it on the right side, it would be 6 plus probably an additional 13. So that would be 19. So that means I would stitch 19 stitches before I would begin the gusset. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so right now we're doing the left. So we're just going to stitch right up to the stitch marker, and we're going to continue with the little mini puff stitch here. So all I'm going to do is I'm actually going to skip this stitch here, and I'm going to go into the next stitch to create my puff. So I have 1 and I have 2. If you're wondering why I skipped that stitch, by the way, it helps to keep my seam straight, okay? So when I come back around to the end, instead of just slip stitching, I am gonna work into this stitch that we missed, okay? So ultimately, you will just have to make sure that you pay attention to your stitch count, which I'll talk about in just a second. So I've got, I think this is number 4. So I've done 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and now I've got my number 5 here. And now I've come up to the stitch marker. So in this stitch, I'm just going to take that marker out for a second. I'm going to place an increase. So I am going to place 2 of these stitches in here. So I'm going to do the mini puff. And then so I don't lose my spot, I'm just going to replace that stitch marker right away. Okay. And then I'm going to go right back into the same stitch and place another mini puff stitch. Okay. So I've placed 2 stitches into 1 here. Now what I'm going to do into the next stitch is I'm going to do the same thing. So I'm going to place 2 puff stitches. So there's 1. and then there is 2. And then what you want to do is grab another stitch marker, and remember, it could be anything, a safety pin, a bobby pin, and you're going to place it in the last stitch of this increase. So we turned 2 stitches, 1, 2, into 4. See that? So now we have 1, 2, 3, and 4 stitches. So we've increased the number of stitches in our round by 2. And now for the rest of the round, you're just going to continue placing 1 puff stitch into every single stitch until you get back to the beginning of your round. Okay, so I'm coming up at the end of the round, and remember when we chained 1 here, we skipped this stitch. This is where we're going to work into it. So I'm going to do the last puff stitch right into there. And now I'm going to slip stitch to join my round. So this would be round number 7, and you are now going to have 28 stitches. So if you're following along with me, you're going to have 28 stitches. You can see it starting to bow out. Whatever stitch count you have, if you're making it for a smaller size, you're just going to have 2 extra stitches than what you started with, okay? And so remember, this is round 7 because the first round was a single crochet round. Then I did another 5 rounds of the puff stitches, so that's round 6. And this has been round number 7, okay? So we're going to go into round number 8, and we're going to continue to work our gusset. Okay, so you will start again, chain 1, and this time I will go into that same stitch. So I usually alternate 1 row or 1 round I will go in right away, and the other round I will skip and go over and come in at the end. So if that's confusing to you, do not worry about it. It's just a technique I use to keep the seam straight. And I have, I believe, a tutorial or a crochet lesson where I talk about keeping your seams straight. And I'll leave a link for that in the description box down below in case you're curious about keeping your seams straight. But otherwise, you can just work into every single stitch as usual. Okay, so I'm just going to continue on until I get to my stitch marker as usual. And I'm going to show you what we're going to do once we hit that stitch marker. So I just have 1 more coming up here. I don't know what they're doing downstairs. There's a lot of banging and scratching. So sorry about the noise, guys. Okay, I have 1 more stitch here. So 1 more puff. Okay, and now I have the stitch marker. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove this stitch marker and I'm going to place an increase here. So that means I'm going to place 2 stitches. So I have 1 puff stitch. And immediately, before I do the second one, I'm going to replace that marker so I don't forget. Okay, so I'm going to place 1 more in the same stitch. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to work the next 2 stitches as normal. So just 1 into each until I get to the next stitch marker. So there's 1 and there's 2. And now I've hit the stitch marker. So into this spot, I'm just going to take that out for a moment. I'm going to place 2. So I'm going to place my increase here. So I have 1 puff stitch. And then I have the second one in the same spot. And once I'm done this one, I will replace my stitch marker. So you can see we're keeping our stitches on the outside marked the same. It's the stitches in between the markers that will increase. So whereas we had 2 stitches in between the markers, we now have 1, 2, 3, and 4, okay? And then for the rest of the round, just like we did in the previous round, you're just going to continue placing 1 puff stitch into every single stitch until you get to the end of your round. Then of course you're going to slip stitch to join and round number 8 is complete. So now you can really start to see where the thumb is. It's really starting to jut out, and that's exactly what we want, okay? So at the end of round 8, I will now have 30 stitches. So we started off with 26, we added 2 in round 7, so that gave us 28. We're adding an additional 2 in round 8, and so now I have 30 stitches in total. So go ahead and finish round number 8, and I'll meet up with you to talk about round number 9. All right, so I'm just slip stitching to join the round here, and I've started changing colors again, as you can see. And so we are going to do one more round of working our gusset. And a really great way to tell, like you might need 4 rounds to complete your gusset. Really great way to tell is when you try it on. So I know that's where my wrist is going to sit. These 2 markers should be able to meet. Now you can see that it's kind of snug, like it's tight on my finger. So I'm going to do one more round. And that way, these 2 markers, see how it's kind of not the most comfortable, but with another round, these 2 markers will be able to come close together nice and comfortably. Look at how nice that colorway is coming out. I really like it. Okay, so we're gonna go on to round number 9. And once again, at the gusset, we're gonna increase by 2 stitches. So I'll chain 1, and I'll start off with my puffs again, all the way to the marker. And I think you guys know the drill by now. So there's 1 and 4th. And oh, nope, this is the stitch. Okay, so I'll take the stitch marker out, and then I'm going to increase into that stitch. So I have 1 puff stitch, and then I replace the marker immediately. It's just a good practice to always replace the marker immediately so you don't lose your spot. And there's the second one. And now I just continue 1 into each of these next few stitches until I hit the next stitch marker. And I think you guys are quite familiar with what's going to happen once we get to that stitch marker. Just have another couple more stitches here. And I'm at the stitch marker, and of course, I'm going to take that out and place an increase. And on this side, we place the marker on the second stitch of the increase, just like that. So now we have 6 stitches in between the markers, and I'm sure you probably can't see that with the way the variegated coloring came in. So you know what to do now for the rest of the round. Whoops. You're just going to continue placing 1 stitch into each. And then once you get to the end, you'll slip stitch to join. So the end of round number 9, I know that I am going to have 32 stitches. Okay. And just really quick to show you, see how the gussets are really coming out. I'm going to put this on just to show you that now these markers actually are coming nice and close together, and that thumb is not super tight in here, okay? So we're gonna finish round number 9, and then we're gonna talk about round number 10, where we're finally gonna close off our thumb hole. Okay, so I'm just coming up here to the stitch marker, and this is where I'm gonna close off my thumb hole. So the last round we finished the gusset, so you can see there's quite a large space there. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 stitches now between the stitch markers. So this should be enough now to bring together and create our thumb hole. So I began the next round and I came around. Now just to double check, because this is going to be for my right hand this time, so I make sure it fits nicely. And then I just arrange those markers, and yeah, feels pretty comfortable. Sometimes people will chain 1 here in between just to give it a little extra. And if you find it's a bit too snug, but you don't want to do extra stitches, then I would do that. But I feel pretty good about this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to work into this first marked stitch here, so I can take that out now. And I'm gonna do my little puff stitch, just like that. Now I'm gonna ignore all of these stitches and I'm gonna come around to the next marked stitch and I'm gonna work my next puff stitch into that one. So I'll insert my hook and then pull through, just like that. So what that does is it creates your thumb hole. And now I would just proceed to finish off this round as usual. So I'm going to do a couple stitches here. Just to get a little bit of distance away from there. Actually, I might as well just finish this round here. Just like that. And then I will slip stitch to join. And that round is complete. Okay, so now the thumb hole is formed. And oh yeah, that fits nice and easy. So you can see now it has a separation and there is how my hand is fitting. So now all you're gonna do is you're gonna create the rest of the body of the hand. So you're gonna go to the length that you need. So I usually go just a little bit beyond my tallest finger, which is my middle finger. But just before I do that, right in the next round, I'm just going to decrease slightly just to create a little bit of a curvature and a shape, and also so that I'm not swimming too much in the top of this mitten here. So we're now back down to 26, but like I said, the puff stitches really create a very relaxed fit. So I'm going to decrease this by about 4 stitches just to create a little bit of more of a shape. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to find a spot in 4 corners to decrease. So right here it's folded, so this end and this end is pretty easy. I'm going to decrease there, and then probably here and here. Now if you have an even stitch count, like I have 26, but it doesn't divide evenly by 4. So 26 divided by 2 is 13, and then 13 divided by 2 is 6.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to round off here. I'm going to decrease in every 6 or 7 stitches. So I'm going to start off here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to chain 1 as usual. And I'm actually going to start off with a decrease. So I'm going to insert my hook here, pull up a loop, and then I'm going to go into the next stitch and I'm going to insert there to create my little mini puff. And so that's my first decrease. And then I'm just going to count maybe 7 stitches for my next decrease. So I have 1, 2, and I have 3, 4, 5. Here is 6. And now this is my 7th stitch. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the 7th and 8th stitch together. So I'll insert into the 7th, and then I'll insert into the 8th and bring those 2 together just like that. Okay, so yeah, it's a good spacing. And now what I'll do is maybe into the 6th stitch, I'll do the decrease. So 5, and now I'm into the 6th, so I'm going to decrease the 6th and the 7th together. So I'll insert, and then there is the 7th, just like that. So I've done 3 decreases, and I just need to do 1 more. Now our 6th one is over the thumb hole here, okay? So I'm just going to work into the 6th one, and I'm going to decrease the 7th and the 8th. Okay, just like that. And so here is the 7th. Here is the 8th. And now I'm just going to work to the end of the row as usual. Actually, that decrease was a bit close to the first one, but you know, you will be a-okay no matter where they are. It's just a rough kind of placement. Okay, so I've come to the beginning again, so I'm going to slip stitch to join. And now, because I've gone from 26 and I've taken away 4 stitches, I should have 22 stitches in my round. And you can see now, see that? It's just creating a shape. Now I will do no more decreases. And I'm just going to continue to work rounds and rounds and rounds until I get the length I need. So again, I always like to try it on. Okay, just like that. Oh yeah, so that is a little bit better. So you see it's not, it's still pretty comfortable, but I'm not swimming around in it as much. And the thumb hole feels pretty comfortable. And that is what I'm going to do. So you're just going to continue on. I already did this for the left mitten. So once you get to the top, then you will weave it in, cinch it in, and then the last thing we're ready to do are our thumbs. Okay, so I have now reached 21 rows, and that fits my hand perfectly. So I'm just going to put that in here. The thumb hole's really great, and you can see my tallest finger is right about there, and it just covers it. And that's perfect for me. We're now going to cinch in the top, and then we're going to be ready to work on our thumbs. So you can see this sits nice and snugly. And so all I'm going to do is I'm going to leave a long tail because I want to weave in the top here. So I'm going to leave a longer tail. I'm going to fasten off, which I already did with the chain 1. And now what I'm going to do is I am going to cinch in the top. And before we do that, you want to make sure that you turn the mitten wrong side out, just like this. And I'm going to thread my yarn. Now, what you can do is you can weave your needle in, then out, and in, then out, so you can just cinch it shut. And I actually did that for this one, and I wasn't too happy because this one came out a little bit larger. I needed to sew it in a few more times. So a lot of times, especially with things like the tops of hats, you'll see me do this method as well. So it's just sitting here nice and easy, just kind of on a fold. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go across the way here. So this is where I ended. I'm going to go across the way there and just pick up those 2 loops. And then I'm going to come back again and do the same thing. So that way it gets cinched in, and then I'm just going to go under there. So it'll be nice and secure. And then what I want to do is where this folded end is, I'm just going to bring that in. Then I'm going to bring this in, and I'm going to sew crossways this way. So making sure to pick up all the loops, go through the center, and go through the side. And this just guarantees that the way you cinch it in just ends up to be a little bit more nice and even. Oops. I know it's probably harder to see at the end now because of the way the variegated colors came out. So I've got these 4 little kind of petals, so to speak, and then I just do that again. So I find the little crease here, I push it in towards the center, and this time I'm going to do it individually. To the center, just like that. And then it cinches that part. And then I come across here and I do the same thing here. So you're just essentially getting all the edges in to come in towards the center, but you're doing it in a nice, even fashion. And now I'm really positive that it's very difficult to see because of the color of the yarn. But hopefully you get the idea. So here's the other one. I'm going to squish that one in towards the center. So the goal is to try and close up all and any gaps that may allow your fingers to poke through. And I am just about there. Then I just have one more edge to do. And you always want to kind of pull your mitten out like this. So this is what the top is going to look like. So you can already see it's cinched it up nicely there. So I just want to continue to make sure and just kind of feel around. If you feel any gaps, just make sure to close those up. I think I have this one left here to do. And then that's it. So I'm just going to kind of finish this off, and then we're going to be ready to work on, and then we're going to be ready to work on our thumb at the end. Then I'm going to snip my yarn, And now we're ready to turn it right side out. Just like that. I always like to try it on to make sure my fingers wiggle nicely in there. And there you have it. Now some of the puff stitch loops are just poking out in weird ways, but that's just kind of the way things go. But I'm really happy with how that looks. It's got that nice Scandinavian winter look to it. And you can just faintly see that seam coming down the center there, but on the front looks good as gold. So now the last thing we're going to do is we're going to do the thumb hole. Sorry, we've already created the hole. So we're going to create the thumb. And as you can see, this one's already complete. And this is the one that came out a little bit larger. So it just gives it a nice, so that's why I like doing the gusset sometimes, because it creates a nice little seamless kind of extension when we do the thumb. So it's going to be really easy, really quick to do. So I'm just going to grab my yarn here. And the only thing I don't like is I actually don't like the fact that I've turned to this color, because in this case, I was able to continue with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to see how much more of this I have, and then it's going to come back to this. Okay, great. So I'm just going to pull ahead, see where the color changes there. I'm just going to snip that. I'm going to do a little cheat, and I'll save that for something else. And then I'm going to pick up with this yarn here. And so you do work this with the right side facing out. Oh, little rogue yarn here. And I always like to start a thumb like in the crease there. It's kind of easier to hide the tail after. So I'm just going to find, so there's a little spot right here, and I'm going to pull my yarn through and then chain one. Now, if you want, you can, I'm going to try and work over this tail, or you can weave this in later, totally up to you. And all I want to do is I just want to work one stitch all the way around here. Okay, so this is a stitch right here. So I'm just going to place one puff stitch in here. Just like that. And now I'm going to move on. So this is where the next stitch ended here. So we're going around the bend here, and I'm going to insert another stitch there. And I'm just trying to hold that tail down so I can work over it. And then I come around the way here, and this is where we joined where the stitch markers were. So this has gotten a little stretched out. I'm not going to worry too much about it. So I am just going to go right in through there and place my next puff stitch. This yarn can be a little splitty sometimes. And now I'm just going to go down into this next stitch here. Whoops. Yeah, I'm going to go down into this next stitch here where that ended off. I'm going to place another puff stitch. So you really want to eyeball this. The idea is that you're just trying to place one stitch all the way around the perimeter of this opening here. See, and now you've got a regular stitch here. And you're going to place it in there. And I'm going to keep going all the way around now. So a little bit easier to find the stitches. Okay, and we're almost there. And then we've got one more, because you can see that's where we started off. If you have a hard time finding your start, remember stitch markers are your friend. Okay, and now I'm ready to slip stitch to join this first round. So let's see how many stitches we have here. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So it will be different for everybody. I know sometimes I ended up with 6, sometimes I ended up with 8. The main thing is you want to make sure that it sits nice and relaxed around your thumb. So I'm going to slip stitch to join here. And then what I like to do again is I want to just try it on. Yep, that feels about right. So it's not too big and it's not too small. And you can see how it just looks seamless going into the thumb. Okay, so now what you're going to do is you're just going to go around in rounds and create the length that you need. So I'm going to probably do 2 more rounds and see where I'm at, and then I'm going to tell you guys what my plan is going to be. So I'm going to do 2 more rounds of puff stitches, just 1 stitch into each. Okay guys, so I have done 2 more rounds, and you can see my thumb is getting covered. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a round of decreases. So I'm going to just slowly start to kind of cinch this in as opposed to gathering it in, just because I think with this with the puff stitches, it's just going to be really bulky. So I think decreases are going to be the way to go. So I think I'm going to do 2 decreases here. I'm going to do 1 right at the beginning here. So I'm going to start my first puff stitch, pull up a loop, and then I'm going to go into the next puff stitch and pull up a loop. So I'm going to take these 2 stitches and make them into 1. And then I'm going to go into the next 3 stitches here. There's the second. And then there is the third. And I just want to do it slightly, somewhat even. Okay, so this is about halfway around. So now I'm going to decrease these 2 stitches together. So I have 1, and then I have the next one, and bring them together. So see, these 2 stitches now become 1, and I have 2 more stitches left to do 2 puff stitches. So this should bring my stitch count down to 8 at this point. Okay, and then I'm going to slip stitch to join at the top of this. So this is round 4 I've just completed of the thumb. So the first 3 rounds were the same number of stitches. I'm going to try it on again. Yep, you can see that that's starting to close in nicely. And basically 1 more round should do the trick to cover it up. So I am going to decrease again here. So I'm going to decrease these first 2 stitches. Just like that. And then I'm going to place 1 into the next stitch. And then 1 into the, actually I'm going to decrease the next 2. So in cases like this where the spacing is really tight, I really just eyeball it. And then I'm going to do a regular one into the next stitch. And I might have even lost a couple stitches in a previous round. And, oh, I've got 1 more stitch there. Just like that. So how many stitches do I have left? I was supposed to have 8, but I don't think I ended up having 8 by the end there. So I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So yeah, that is correct. So now I'm going to slip stitch to the top of this one, and this should now cover my thumb. Yeah, that's pretty good. You can just see the tip there. So I will just now cinch in the rest of that, and look at how perfect that is. Okay, so I'm going to snip my yarn here. I'm just going to fasten this off. And then I just want to try to turn this thumb inside out, because I always like to sew things like this from the inside out so that when you turn it out, it'll be nice and seamless. So let me just make sure. Actually, why don't I do this first? Just to really confuse you guys. I'm just going to send my tail to the inside here. So there's that opening. I'm going to send it in through the center, and that should make it a little easier to pull it through. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so I just have this little tiny opening, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to weave in and out, and this one I will cinch in just because it's nice and small. And it'll be easier to do. So when I pull that, see, it gets cinched nice and shut. And then I just weave in back and forth a few times to just knot it. Keep it nice and secure, and then our thumb is complete. Okay, just like that. And then I'll snip my yarn, and our thumb is done. So right side out. Look at that. Okay, your mitten is now complete. So this is my right side. So I'm going to put that on. Look at that, perfect fit. And the thumb is snug but comfy. It doesn't feel tight and it's not too loose. And there you have it, my little puff stitch mittens. And I love how the cuff goes, you know, further down the arm. This is my favorite way to wear a glove because then it tucks nicely into my coat and it really prevents any air from getting in. Now, if you find that this is too long, you can still fold it over like that and you still have a decent cuff. Like it's still pretty decent depending on, you know, the type of coat that you're wearing, but that's it. And that is how you crochet your mitten with the gusset. Okay. So I am going to now leave you with that. So I just want to show you here the difference between this one and this one. Okay. So this was the first one I started to do. And because I just kind of followed my regular formula and didn't take into effect the puff stitch, look at the difference. Like my hand is really swimming in here. And then this one, see, it's still relaxed, but it's a bit more snug. So maybe if I knew a very large-handed man in my life, I could give this to him. But so this is the importance of understanding kind of what stitches will work best for your particular projects. So as I learned here, and I wanted to kind of show you guys my boo-boo so that you can learn from me, that the puff stitch sits a little bit more lax. It's cushy, but it's going to spread out a bit more. So that's why I adjusted my stitch count for the puff stitch. So there you have it. Now, if you have any other questions, because I'm sure there's going to be questions, especially when we get around to the gusset and maybe doing the decreases just after the cuff there. Maybe you're going to have some questions. So just leave them for me in the comment box down below. And I know many of you do like to email me directly. So you can definitely do that and just email me at info@crochetcrafty.com. And always remember, attach a photo of your work because that way I can kind of have a deeper look and be able to better help you, I feel. So, and as always, make sure to check out the website, crochetcrafty.com. There's lots of great resource tools there for you, sizing charts, things like that, lots of free patterns, and a link to the Etsy shop, which is Crochet Crafty Canada. And as always, I invite you to come say hi to me. I'm on Facebook and Instagram at The Stitch Sessions. So I hope you had fun working on this cozy pair of mittens. I'm curious to see if you're going to use a variegated yarn like I did, or if you're going to use a solid color, or maybe you're going to use a combination of colors. Let me know. Make sure to tag me in your work at The Stitch Sessions. All right, guys, that's it for today. And I look forward to seeing you guys next week. Make sure, as always, take good care of yourselves. Happy crocheting, and I'll see you guys in next week's session. Bye-bye.